Well, hey, church, welcome back to our Sunday night lessons. I'm going to continue in what I've been doing on these Sunday nights and give some extra thoughts regarding our Sunday morning message. I really enjoyed this morning putting the passages from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, harmonizing those together in this one particular instance. And I'll have that video uploaded from the Sunday morning sermon soon for your re-review purposes and for those who may not have been able to see it this morning. I'll go ahead and read our text that was from Matthew's perspective as we've been studying through the book of Matthew. And then I have a couple other extra talking points that I didn't include in my sermon this morning due to time constraints. Again, the passage is Matthew 26, verses 47 through 50. While Jesus was still speaking, behold, Judas, one of the 12, came up accompanied by a large crowd with swords and clubs, who came from the chief priests and elders of the people. Now he who was betraying him gave them a sign, saying, "Whomever I kiss, he is the one, seize him." Immediately Judas went to Jesus and said, "Hail, Rabbi," and kissed him. And Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you have come for." And they came and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. One of the things I didn't include in this morning's sermon was to talk more about how Judas could have done this thing that he did in betraying Jesus. Well, we know that, John lets us know that Judas was concerned with money and was the one that carried the money bag, and he had an interest in money. But I don't think money alone is the complete reason why Judas betrayed Jesus. I think that just like the other disciples, I think Judas, part of it is that Judas grew frustrated. And I'm just going to go over some of the theories. We can't. It's one of those things that's been debated for ever since it happened, as to how it could have happened. Why did it happen? But I think what's more important than all of that is to ask the question, could it still happen? Does it still happen? And the answer to that is yes, unfortunately. But let me go through some of the thoughts. I don't have any original thoughts. I don't think any original thoughts are probably out there anymore regarding Judas. Everything that can be imagined has probably been imagined and has been written. Here are some of the leading, kind of ideas. One of them I was actually talking about with Tom Norris this morning. We were discussing this very thing. How could Judas have done this? He spends 3.5 years of his life with Jesus. How is his whole life not consumed with Christ? Well, a big part of it was he probably shared some of the same frustrations that the rest of the disciples had. Once they realized and came to the understanding that Jesus wasn't going to set up a kingdom on this earth. They all had these grand ideas in their head about how Jesus was going to be king of Israel, how he was likely going to overthrow the Roman Empire, kick them out of Israel. Israel would be a real force in the world again, and the temple could be, reestablished as it was in the days of Solomon, and the glory of the Lord would return to Israel in a very powerful way through the perfect candidate that they'd ever seen come along that could restore the kingdom, Jesus. And there was all this talk of the kingdom. Of course, all that talk of the kingdom, Jesus tried to explain to them that he wasn't referring to an earthly kingdom in the here and now, but he was talking about a future kingdom. Well, they, just like us, they listened to what they wanted to listen to. They heard what they wanted to hear, and they kept imagining, well, he's probably still going to set up a kingdom here on earth. And if we are his closest followers, the 12, then we are going to have the highest positions of authority in that kingdom. Things aren't looking too good for us now as we're camping out and, sleeping in the countryside, camping out under the stars. And and things like that, going from place to place without a home. But things are going to change for us real soon. And very soon, we're all going to be living very high on the hog. Well, I think when Judas realized that wasn't going to happen, he thought, well, maybe there's a way I can get a little bit of money out of this deal. So he betrayed Jesus for those 30 pieces of silver. You know, as Tom was talking to me this morning, he was saying something I've heard in variations of before. You know, I don't think that Judas thought that what was going to happen to Jesus was actually going to go down. And we see evidence of that in the scripture as well. It says later on, Matthew chapter 27, we haven't got there yet, but it says when Judas saw that Jesus was arrested and that they had condemned him, that he was filled with remorse. See, I think Judas had witnessed Jesus get out of a lot of tight spots over the years. And he thought, well, I can make some money on this deal by betraying Jesus over to these guys. And Jesus is going to get out of this tight spot anyway. Maybe Judas was envisioning going back to Jesus and apologizing and carrying on business as usual. We don't know. But that's one of the theories. And I think it's certainly true that Judas didn't know that his betrayal of Christ was going to lead to his death, because once he found that out, he was filled with remorse. Another one of it's a very popular theory, I've read it in a multitude of places regarding this, was that Judas was actually Judas thought that he was actually doing a good thing in betraying Christ. See, Judas was tired, just as the rest of the disciples were, of Jesus not instituting that earthly kingdom. So the theory goes, Judas was going to betray Christ to put him into a situation where Christ had to take action, where he had to do what he'd been putting off doing, making a physical action against the religious leaders, the Roman Empire, the establishment. And so that's one of the theories as well, is that Judas was trying to force Jesus's hand. There are now these are few and far between, but there are even some things I've read out there that try to paint Judas as a good guy, basically saying, you know, this had to happen. It was all part of God's plan, and Judas was a part of that, and God's plan is ultimately, you know, what had to happen anyway. You know, all of that is true, but the scripture also makes it very clear that Judas, even though God worked all these things that happened into his plan, and it worked out the way God intended for it to work ultimately, Judas is still responsible for his sin. He's still responsible for allowing Satan into his life. And as Luke's chilling statement says, Judas allowed Satan to come into him. Now, the scripture doesn't say Judas allowed. The scripture actually says, then Satan entered into him. Well, church, sometimes people will look at that verse and they will paint Judas as, you know, a victim in that situation. That's, you know, I'll give an inch of credit to that and say, yes, he was a victim, but no more of a victim than anybody else is. Satan does not have the authority to take you over unless you are willing to let him take you over. And Judas was willing to let Satan take him over, and so he did. So, but Judas, we can't paint him as a bad guy. Judas, or as a good guy rather. Jesus himself said at the Last Supper, when he was talking about his future betrayal coming, Matthew 26, verse 24. I got it right there. When Jesus said, the Son of Man is to go just as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been good for that man if he had not been born. If it were a good thing that Judas was doing, Jesus would not have said those words. Guarantee you that. So Judas is perplexing. But we don't want to spend all this time focusing on Judas. I think that's a wrong thing. And taking the attention away from Christ, where it is properly due in our Bible studies and in our sermons and teachings. But I think the greatest thing that Judas does for us is gives us a great warning, a warning to not be like him. Say, well, how can we be like Judas? How can we betray Christ? Well, one way that we can betray Christ is, just like Judas, you can be part of the religious crowd. You can be part of those who are the true disciples of Christ, those who are the true followers of Christ, and not actually be one yourself. Never having made the decision that, yes, I am going to follow this Jesus. Yes, I am going to bow the knee to him in physically and in my heart. What he says goes. He is my master. What he says goes, and I will forsake all others and all other gods on this earth for Christ. That you can very well be in a religious group, be a part of a religious group, and blend right into it, and have no loyalty to Christ whatsoever. Not believe that he is the Christ in actuality, not have any love for him, not care about following his commandments, not care about learning to follow him more closely and deny yourself more. There is no taking up of your cross daily and following after him in your life. If that's a description of you, then you're very much like Judas, and that's a scary thing. We want to do everything within our power to not be like that. Let me just give you this little side note. There's two wonderful books in the New Testament that you can read, and neither one of them take very long to read. But there's two books that you can read that are full of tests that you can, as you go through the scripture, you can read, and the scripture either describes you as a true follower of Christ, or you will quickly determine that you are not really a follower of Christ after you read these texts. The first one is the book of 1 John. John wrote his book, I truly believe, with the intention of doing two things. Number one, making Christians, true followers of Christ, feel secure in their salvation. And the other reason that he wrote his book was to make those who said that they were followers of Christ but weren't actually followers of Christ feel very insecure and say, hey, he's not describing me. I need to right the ship. There are things I can do to get myself right with Christ. And John tells you how to do that. The other book is the book of James. James gives a very, the whole book from beginning to end is also a series of tests. And as you read through that book of James, he does the same thing that John does. If you're a believer and you're a true follower of Christ and you're reading through the book of James, James is going to affirm that you are a true believer. If you are not, if you are a pretender, or if you call yourself a Christian, but you read that book and say, this is nothing like me at all, then you also would need to right the ship. But the last great text I would have you to read in order to either to make yourself, to affirm your salvation, or in order for you to say, well, hey, this doesn't describe me, I need to do something different, is to read the Sermon on the Mount, particularly Matthew's version of it, Matthew chapters 5 through 7. Read that and see how you measure up to what Christ describes as one of his true followers. No matter what, we don't want to go through our life and at the end of our life think that we're a follower of Christ, but not actually be. the good news for us is that the Bible spells out very clearly what it means to be a follower of Christ. If you're interested in knowing that, it's right there for you to find out. As Jesus said, ask, seek, and knock. I want you to know that I'm here for you and the church is here for you. If you have any questions, or if you've ever doubted your own salvation, that's a conversation I would love to have with you and help you get yourself back on track. If you've never confessed Christ, if you've never let it be known publicly that yes, you believe and that you want to follow Christ, if you've never put him on in baptism, we can help you out with those things as well. We want you to know that we're here for you, and we'll help you with that as well. If there's any way we can serve you, we're here for you. We want you to feel secure in your salvation. Christ intended for you to feel secure. He didn't intend for any of us to walk around feeling nervous about whether or not we actually are saved or not. The Bible makes it clear what a saved person is and what a saved person is not, if we care to look. Until next time, church, love God and love others. I'm Wes LaFleur, signing off.